Hello and welcome to the Giddy Carousel of Pop, the podcast that usually takes a look at an old issue of Britain's brightest pop mag smash hits, but not this time.
That's right, we've returned from down the dumper and we're back with a special episode celebrating the 40th anniversary of Dexys Midnight Runners album Don't Stand Me Down. And we're joined by some previous riders on the carousel to take a trip down rock's lost highway and discuss the album.
I'm Simon Galloway, he's Gavin Hogg, and in this episode we speak to former smash hit staffer and Dexys fan Chris Heath, who originally reviewed the album for The Hits in September 1985, Dexys superfan, music critic and member of the legendary chart music podcast We Are Not Worthy, Simon Price, to get the fans' perspective on the album, and also how its reputation has grown in the years since its release.
Indeedly doodly, and we're also honoured to welcome two members of Dexys Midnight Runners themselves, actual members, Si,
I know,
of Dexys. That's exciting, isn't it? Helen O'Hara, who has been on the carousel previously, and Kevin Adams, aka Billy, to talk to us about their memories of making the album and what happened after its release.
There's a YouTube playlist featuring some of the songs and performances discussed in this episode. You'll find a link to that in the show notes. And before we properly get things underway, let's have a brief bit of background and context, shall we? Don't Stand Me Down was the third album released under the Dexys Midnight Runners name, although the band had been through many lineup and stylistic changes since the release of their first album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, in 1980. They scored two number one singles in the UK, Gino, also in 1980, and Come On Eileen in 1982, which was the biggest selling UK single of that year and also hit the top spot in the US in 1983. Their first two albums were big sellers and both reached the top 10, so it's fair to say expectations were high for Don't Stand Me Down. However, it was released to a handful of favourable reviews but was mostly met with confusion and indifference, both critically and in terms of sales, and just over a year later the band split up. But, as we'll hear, the album's reputation has grown over the years and is now considered a classic.
So, dear readers, listeners and viewers, have a cup of milky tea and a cream horn and enjoy this little detour on the Giddy Carousel of Pop.
And let's begin our Dexys exploration with Simon Price.
First time I heard Dexys would have been Gino on the Top 40 Countdown, and it really struck me because at the time I was into two-tone and the kind of mod revival stuff, and it felt somehow adjacent to that, but there was something really different about it, and I could tell it had that kind of anger that you associate with punk, or that kind of spirit anyway, but also this other thing which I wouldn't have recognised at the time as being Stax soul, but that was obviously the bedrock of it. And it really kind of, I don't think I heard it on the radio for another couple of weeks. And I remember the following week, I couldn't, for some reason, I missed the top 40. I don't know why I couldn't listen to it. And then when I was able to hear the top 40 again, I thought, I wonder what's happened to that weird Dexys Midnight Runners record. And they were counting down and counting down and counting down. I thought, must have just gone away, dropped out of the charts. And it was number one. And I just thought, wow, this is a moment. Something mad's happened here. And I still get kind of goosebumps when I'm British. I'm going to say goose pimples. When I think about the way that they just stormed Top of the Pops, particularly, and this is something we talked about on the Chart Music podcast, when you see them performing when they are number one, the way they just kind of march onto the stage, it's like they've taken the stage. It's like, a hooligan firm taking the away end at a football match or something like that. It's this extraordinary, quite kind of aggressive triumph, really sticking their flag in the ground like Graham Souness in Turkey, So that stuck with me, that this band had this kind of indomitable, uncompromising edge to them, that they may have chimed with the times in some ways, but they were their own thing. They were definitely their own thing. And those first two albums, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels and Tour AA, were very much the soundtrack to my sort of adolescent bedroom angst. in a way that the Smiths would later be. But Dexys were the first soundtrack to me, sitting alone in my room, feeling sorry for myself and thinking somebody out there understands me, and that someone is Kevin Rowland. So they were really special to me, and obviously I was aware that to the broader public, they were known for their occasional hit records, like Gino, like Come On Eileen, Jackie Wilson Said, and so on. But I was also aware that there was this whole kind of almost religious cult, this sort of underground following that they also had. They had two followings at once, kind of pop following and the real hardcore. And I aspired to being the hardcore, even though I was just a kid who really had encountered them in a very pop way from the top 40. So, yeah, they were just hugely important to me. I think they taught me all kinds of virtues of kind of, I don't know, self-reliance and self-discipline and self-belief, just knowing that if everyone else in the world disagrees with you, it doesn't mean you're wrong. That's the kind of feeling I got from Dexys. So, yeah, just it ran deep. There were other bands I loved around that time, but I think they struck a chord with me that was deeper than anyone else.
So that's the memories of a young Simon Price. But what does Chris Heath remember about discovering Dexys?
Yeah, I was there pretty much from the beginning. I mean, me and my older brother Guy used to share records, so I can't remember which of us bought it, but we had Dance Dance, the first single that became Burn It Down on the first album. And then we had the first album, and I loved and still love chunks of that first album. So I was sort of, all in. Yeah, and so that, I paid pretty close attention from then on.
And Tu Rai, was that an album you loved as well?
Yeah, but I tended to like bits kind of, around the edges, so, I was thinking, the weird thing for people about Dexys is that you've you've got Gino and Come On Eileen, and really I kind of think like they're two one-hit wonders. That they're great, but they have nothing really. I mean, of course they do, but they're not really why people who love Dexys, and they also sort of hide the fact that it's this group that which is partly probably where we're going to some degree, with this group who's struggling to succeed most of the time, and everyone forgets after Gino, there's hits that didn't get in the top 40. And then obviously after Come On Eileen, things started sliding surprisingly quickly downhill even then. So that when you got to Don't Stand Me Down, it wasn't like they were in this position of sort of commercial giganticness that they then, fuzzled away with this very strange record. No one cared, which seems amazing now, but they didn't really.
Yeah, they'd gone from being, like say, such a massive band, and Come On Eileen was number one in America as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
It was absolutely huge.
Yeah.
It was everywhere for months and months. And then, next album came out, and it was, it just kind of fizzled quite quickly, didn't it?
Well, it didn't even fizzle, Don't Stand Me Down. It was
I was bigging it up with a fizzle.
Yeah. But I mean, I also see it as like three, they are, in some ways they are literally three different groups, but they're three different groups aesthetically, and and there's bits that I just totally love from the first album, and then I think I know it's much cooler to say that Don't Stand Me Down is their best record. It's certainly their most interesting record in a certain way, but I think probably their best album, almost reluctantly I'd say, is Tu Rai. That's the one that's really got the kind of cohesion, but because I was paying a lot of attention, the seeds of Don't Stand Me Down were sort of there to be seen in the gap between. And, the key song is this song, hopefully, Reminisce Part 1, that was on the B-side of the reissued version of the Celtic Soul Brothers. And I was obsessed by this. I mean, it's one of the weirdest songs. It's mostly talking. It's sort of, it's magically mad. And, Kevin Ryan's talking about the ghost of Brendan Behan, and there's this weird sort of mad and kind of almost, kind of rude bit about Stevie Wonder, who's not named. I think I'm going to quote him correctly. He goes, I didn't like the song, mind, but I knew what he meant about the higher ground. And it's like such an incredibly weird and sort of disrespectful thing. But this song, it's an amazing song. It sounds amazing the way he talks and the conversation, and it's amazing. And then the melody it goes to at the end is absolutely fantastic. So I was totally on board for that. I didn't know that that's where everything was going. But then, and this is fantastically specific, but my brother was away in Germany studying, and he recorded off the radio this concert of them playing towards the end of the Tour promotion and playing in Essen, and he gave me the cassette. And it's this apart from the tour being called The Bridge, it's the sort of bridge towards where it was going. And there's these versions of these songs that culminate in this 13.5-minute version of Until I Believe in My Soul, which has got endless talking between everyone. Describing it makes it sound ridiculous. You know, effectively a policeman comes on stage and is trying to arrest Kevin Rowland for the crime of burning. And there's a lot of back and forth about whether it's burning or churning. I mean, but it builds up into builds into the song. It's an incredible thing. It's an absolutely, and this is all before, this I was listening to then on this cassette again and again. And in a way that, in arguably in a sort of imperfect version, that's what this album that we're now talking about is. I mean, it's people like it for all kinds of reasons, but I think that, he was doing something totally strange in the way he was combining speech and conversation and music. I listen to those conversational sort of things and try and work out what that is that he's doing. I think mostly that was, even by a lot of people who championed the album, they thought that was just sort of weird, eccentric Kevin fluff, that got in the way of some pretty good songs. There's some weird production, some very questionable clothing choices, but there's some great Dexys songs in there. But to me, those conversations and that kind of talking, that is the magical essence of what this is. And I think it would be wrong to say it was a complete success. But what a fantastically amazing thing to be kind of trying to do.
So Gavin and I were lucky enough to be joined on a little video chat with Dexys members Helen O'Hara and Kevin Adams, known as Billy in his Dexys days. I think for obvious reasons, there was probably only room for one Kevin in Dexys back in the 80s. But Helen and Kevin spoke to us about their memories of the making of Don't Stand Me Down.
How different was the songwriting process, Kevin? Because obviously you'd been in Dexys earlier than Helen. Did you feel it was more intense? Maybe tell us about sort of a typical week of songwriting for Don't Stand Me Down.
Most of the songwriting that I can remember was the three of us together in Helen and Kevin's flat on the Hagley Road. And I can't remember any little detail, I've got to be honest, but I do remember Kevin playing a Beach Boys record, and he's recalled, and this is probably true, that he played people, the Beach Boys and Bob Dylan, but I can't remember ever hearing Bob Dylan because I was never a fan of Bob Dylan until my late 20s, really. But I do remember him playing the Beach Boys and saying, look, we've got an open slate now. We're not brass-led. We're not string-led. We can do anything we like. And I love the sound of this. And we went from there, really.
That's right. I remember hearing Blonde on Blonde and Highway Revisited.
Oh, right.
And when Kevin and me were watching a video and a film, Pennies from Heaven, and there was a bit of bluesy violin, and he stopped the tape, the VHS tape, and rewound it, recorded it, and he said, "This would be good for the fiddle now," because it was at that point, it was still very experimental we were still experimenting a lot, weren't we, Kev? So I started to listen to more bluesy fiddle players, but that meant going to a record shop and thumbing through the records, because obviously there was no internet or anything. And I was coming across players like Clarence Gatemouth Brown, and I'd be listening to that as a sort of solo violin now, because the trio of the Emerald Express wasn't happening. Kevin wanted to do other things. And it was only later, as the months rolled on, that we sort of settled on that fairly big free lineup, didn't we, of one violin, rhythm section, brass section, backing vocal type things. So it was a very interesting first few months.
I just wanted to pick up on something Kevin said earlier. You said about things felt a lot freer. There was a lot less pressure on you, and you had the room to experiment. I wonder does that bring its own pressures as musicians in a way, or is that actually quite a liberating thing?
Well, I think at the time the idea was that the songs would suggest the instrumentation, rather than in the past we'd been restricted by the band was originally an 8-piece with 3-piece brass, and then incorporated strings. And throughout the previous band history, there was always a lineup which sort of dictated how the songs would sound. But Kevin's suggestion, I think, with playing the Beach Boys, and as Helen said, she heard Bob Dylan. For some reason, I can't remember that at all. But I do. The Beach Boys stuck out for me. But I remember it being a complete blank slate, and it being quite, it felt like a new start, really, in a very positive way. And I think, the songs would suggest the instrumentation rather than the other way around.
Were these suggestions coming from Kevin, or were you able to bring ideas to the songwriting process and to the arrangement, or was this largely coming from Kevin? He had a vision, an idea, I want to do this, or was it more collaborative?
I think Kevin would lead it. Kevin had the main ideas, I think, but it was collaborative. And I think the wonderful thing was that we met every day, and it was a sort of 9 to 5 type getting together, or maybe 10 to 5. We would drink lots of tea, but we'd work through things and try things out. And I suppose it is hard because it was happening and rolling on every day for weeks and weeks, that it's quite hard to remember how a song came by in the end. I mean, it was a really nice way of working, actually. It seemed very relaxed to me, and very natural. And I think the three of us, our personalities were great. It was just always seemed like a really good group. There was never any arguing or disagreeing, but we always had our own opinions and things. And certainly I remember Kev Adams, being Kevin Rowland really respected, your feedback and opinions on things. And, he'd really listen to that. And if you thought something wasn't great, it wouldn't happen, sort of thing, I just think it was a good balance of people and personalities. We could see the potential in the album. I think that's what it was. We understood Kevin's vision, and it was exciting, and there was freedom, and there wasn't pressure on us to get it written by a certain date. I mean, obviously that cost a lot of money, but it allowed us to experiment and have this huge, expanse of time creating this album without anybody sort of seeming to breathe down our neck. I mean, I think that, the record company would steam in occasionally and say, can we hear something, and this sort of thing. But we generally ignored them, I think, or played them something, and their reactions were very raised eyebrows, But it was a good feeling, I felt, all through that writing process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It did feel so free because we had made so much time, didn't we? We had a good old break before we started. So we did feel like break with the old and in with the new. And it was very much a matter of when we would chat about the process, it'll be ready when it's ready, which isn't the way a record company normally likes to work, is it? But the songs were going to take as long as they were going to take, and that felt so free at the time.
I think obviously one of the things that really sets the album apart, and as well makes the break with the old, is obviously the spoken word sections on the album. There's conversations, which are always very entertaining, and like one of my favourite parts of the album. I think I've read that they were sort of ad libs that you eventually started to script a bit more tightly. Is that right?
It was. There was ad libbing in rehearsal, and yeah, there were certain things that were, oh, that's good, keep that in, yeah, and it did get more and more scripted. But that idea really came out of, was it Reminisce Part 2? Can you remember, Helen, the B-side? We did a B-side, and we'd actually had quite a hectic few months, hadn't we? And certainly hadn't enjoyed being in the studio as much as we used to. And then we went in with, was it Colin Fairley?
Yes.
We went in and we did Reminisce Part 2. Kevin had got the chords and we knew pretty much what the song might do, but there was a lot of spoken word in that, and there was some improvisation. And that was so much fun. And I think a lot of the ideas for spoken word perhaps came out of that session.
But it's certainly to start a song just with...
Yeah, brave move.
Was extraordinary, yeah. And I think... I can't really remember how I felt about it initially, but I don't think anything really surprised me that Kevin Rowland suggested, really. You know what I mean? It was always... It might take a little while to get used to something, just to get your head around it, but it was often... just such a great move, you know. So, and then I think as soon as the conversation thing happened with the two of them, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt totally right for the album.
It was fun, and it's such a surprise the first time you hear the album, isn't it? I would love to have seen some of the reactions from people listening to that for the first time.
So, thinking back to the recording of the album, what do you remember about that?
It was interesting working with the various producers. With Tom Dowd, it was interesting to work with Tom, even though it didn't work out. We worked with Jimmy Miller as well for a short time. And there was the Roxy Music guy as well, wasn't there, Kev? I can't remember his name now. But it was all very interesting. But it was kind of no surprise in the end that it just boiled down to the three of us producing the album. I know Adam and Stanley, he was involved all the way as the engineer, and I'm sure he contributed a lot of sound ideas and things. But in the end, it was the three of us who made that album. And that's why in my book, I mentioned that on the second release, I wasn't happy about the cover of being Kevin and Billy, or Kevin and Kev together. Not because it wasn't a great picture. It's a fantastic picture. But I always thought, if you're going to have us on, it needed to be the three of us. Because it so much was the three of us, that album. Even though Kevin Rowland's vision, it was his vision all the way. It was such a strong trio. But in the end, I think, it had to be us who produced it, really.
Yeah, we totally agree with that. Bang on. It was the three of us that made it in the end. I'll tell you what made me laugh. It wasn't until I bought that re-release on Discogs and I was reading the cover and it said produced by. It's like, oh God, I didn't know I was listed as a producer. That was the first time I'm reading the back of the cover, which was quite nice, all those years down the line. The other thing I would say, it's such a shame. I always kept old cassettes. We took a lot of cassettes home, didn't we, from every session we'd get someone in the studio to run off a few cassettes so we could go home and listen to stuff. I've got a great big box of tapes, and I recorded over nearly every single one of them, and I wish there were copies of the songs on Don't Stand Me Down being developed. And as Helen said, with those different producers too, it would be fantastic to know how some of the songs sounded with different people, because we spent a month in Montreux at Mountain Studios with Tom Dowd, with an amazing band, and we came back with, listen to this, we came back with the shortest song on the album.
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a recording, but it's not much for a month's work in Mountain Studios, you know. And then we put another band together, including Woody Woodman's on drums, and it was another great lineup, wasn't it? And we visited I don't know how many studios around the southeast, probably mostly London. Maybe that was when we're in West Side Studios. And at the end of all of those sessions, we'd got one more song. We had the waltz. And then it wasn't until Tim Dancy came along and we finished the whole rest of the album with Tim and that Memphis feel, you know. And we didn't even know it wasn't working, was it? It really wasn't working with the other producers. But it wasn't until Tim walked in the room and sat at the kit, and that's the feel we were after. And suddenly it all came together quite quickly after that. Well, you know, apart from the millions of overdubs.
Exactly. But it just goes to show, and I think it's, you know, for every band, is if you haven't got your drummer in place, your music won't be in place, you know. And Tim was just the prime example of that, wasn't he, Kev? He's just, as soon as Tim started playing, everybody responded to that, and certainly the three of us knew that was it wasn't just his groove, it was his sound as well, and his energy as this incredibly positive. He got the songs. It was amazing. This guy who played with Al Green and you know, all these soul guys, but he understood Don't Stand Me Down, which I always thought was pretty amazing, because the music was very far removed from what he would have been playing normally, you know. So we found him. Kevin and me went to see Al Green play, and I said, we've been trying lots of drummers, and I said to Kevin, that is our drummer. He's going to be expensive because he's from Memphis, but we've spent so much money already. And it was true, wasn't it, Kev? Because he recorded the songs in a few days and then he went home. So you got the right drummer.
Fantastic that you caught him like that. Such a stroke of luck that you went to that show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe we could go on actually to Chris Heath's review of the album in Smashes, because we're a Smashes podcast. So maybe if I read this to you, and then you can perhaps give me any thoughts. So it says, bit of a strange one, this. 3 years after his Celtic Soul Brother phase, Kevin Rowland returns, having traded in his dungarees for an accountant's suit, which is an odd thing to do, but not half as odd as making an LP with 7 long rambling songs, continually interrupted by Kevin chatting either to himself or his guitarist about his thoughts on some important matter or another. A lot of people would probably dismiss this as pretentious, tuneless rubbish. There's certainly no big hit singles here, but others will find these tortured songs about Kevin's loves, Kevin's past, and Kevin's this and that quite captivating. Me, for instance, 8.5 out of 10.
Not bad.
That's quite a positive review, isn't it? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. But
I mean, there were a handful of great critical reviews at the time, but it didn't feel like they were in the majority. That's a particularly good one, and in the style that you'd expect for smash hits at the time.
Yes, I think most were. It was very much clouded by what we were wearing. You know, there was a huge amount of sort of emphasis on this accountant look, and it showed me how close people's minds were, and how people want predictability, and would have wanted another Touré, or maybe slightly not too far away from Touré sort of thing, and to do something so different, people just were shocked, genuinely shocked, I think.
I remember Kevin saying, why can't people have albums like they used to? There is no obvious single on this album. Although, with hindsight, which is also always brilliant, isn't it? With hindsight, Listen to This was screaming out to be a single, but I wonder if at the time perhaps we thought Listen to This wasn't representative of the album. I don't know why that hadn't certainly occurred to me. But when Kevin suggested it'd be great to just release the album, I thought, brilliant, let's do that. We all thought that, didn't we, Helen?
We did, Kev, yeah. And also it was that thing of like the groups that in the 70s did a lot of that, didn't they? They were album groups, you know what I mean? They didn't really have a single. It was seeing it more as a whole rather than a series of first, second, third, fourth, single, that sort of thing. And again, it was we weren't considering the length of the songs when we were writing them. It was like you were saying, Kev, about we were just going with what felt right in every way. Whereas then and now and probably has always been, if you want to try and get a hit single, you have to have that 3 minute or whatever the timing is of the time, and the formula really as well, pretty much, to get a chance of airplay on the radio. And I think we were just thinking that we would cut through that, but obviously we didn't.
So let's return to that Smash Hits review that appeared in the edition that was out September 11th to the 24th. 1985, with staff writer and reviews editor Chris Heath.
You gave it 8.5 out of 10. You talk about him trading in his dungarees for an accountant's suit. You said, which is an odd thing to do, but not half as odd as making an LP with 7 long rambling songs, continually interrupted by Kevin chatting either to himself or his guitarist about his thoughts on some important matter or another. A lot of people probably dismiss it as pretentious, tuneless rubbish. There's certainly no big hit singles here, but others will find these tortured songs about Kevin's loves, Kevin's past, and Kevin's this and that quite captivating. Me, for instance.
I kind of stand by that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. Is that something you stand by? And yeah, clearly it is.
I was quite surprised. I'd forgotten I'm surprised that I feel it's a bit of a nerve to give it that high. To give it 8.5, because we didn't operate on a generous star system, and we also didn't, like in the relations between us, it was not cool to like give loads of stars to something you thought was super cool and hip, that the audience wouldn't like, the readers wouldn't like. So it's what I would give it now, but I'm surprised I gave it that then. But I agree with it, and. It's funny looking, I mentioned the clothes there and I made a sort of aside about it earlier. I can remember through the prism of like being at Smash Hits in 1985, those clothes, they were not just like a kind of, oh, that's a bit odd, that's an interesting kind of star choice. It was like so impossibly wrong, and not so wrong that it was right. It was just like they were disqualifying themselves from being pop stars. They were saying, we are not interested in any of your attention. I don't think that's what Kevin wrote. Kevin Rowland, I know, had this whole Brooks Brothers American fashion, business fashion idea and stuff. But none of that read. It just read like a load of people who were saying, don't be interested in us.
Well, looking at this album's review page in this particular issue of Smash Hits, you got quite a few albums to review this particular fortnight. So the ones that you got were Lisa Lisa and Cult Jam with Full Force, which you gave 5 out of 10 to. Bronski Beat, Hundreds and Thousands, which that was the remix album, wasn't it? Yeah. And he said the last line of this, a poor tribute to a great band. And you gave that 5 out of 10. And then the album of the fortnight, this is highlighted in a blue box. Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. So,
I reviewed that.
You reviewed that, and you gave it a whopping 9 out of 10. So it even beat the Dexys score there.
Well, I think that, I'd stand by that too.
Yeah.
I'm quite, because that's quite a strange record to hear in 1985 and judge in the first couple of days. It's got that whole side of weirdness.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad that I,
Yeah, you got two quite uncompromising albums there, both by artists that would have been smash hits regulars from Kate Bush from the beginning of smash hits really, and Dexys from when they appeared, obviously having two number one singles. But yeah, it's interesting to see how these artists, particularly with Dexys and Kate Bush, that are held in such high esteem now, and such high critical esteem, and how that intersected with smash hits by this point. So in the mid 80s, and both artists are going off and doing something quite different to what they'd previously done. I guess you could see more of a progression with Kate Bush on her albums, but with Dexys, to the casual observer, they've done To Rye and Come On Eileen, then all of a sudden, it's just Kevin and Billy just yakking throughout the songs of what's going on there.
but it's not so much though, because the sort of smash hits ethos is everything's present, so the past doesn't really matter. And I mean, Kate Bush, I think, was coming off The Dreaming, which was a totally unsuccessful record, but it didn't matter. She was coming out. She was coming out with these amazing singles, but even though from people who weren't reading smash hits, you'd think that sonically these things were kind of not young people's pop music, but there were huge pop songs, but also visually and stuff. She was doing she was firing on all. There was so much for us to lean into and be excited about, and so much for the readers to be interested and excited about. So it's Kate Bush worked in a smash hits context. 1985 Dexys Midnight Runners just really didn't.
Let's hear from Pricey again.
I feel ashamed for my reaction to Don't Stand Me Down, because I think in a way I am a microcosm of the rest of the world's reaction to it. Because if an extraordinary record comes along, it can either knock you off your feet or it can wrong foot you. And for me, it was the latter. I don't know what I wanted from Dexys around that time. I will admit that they had been supplanted in terms of a soundtrack to my adolescent angst by the Smiths by that point. But when I heard they had a new record out, obviously I was keen to hear it, and I still had a fondness for the earlier two records. And I just... This is so superficial of me, but just when I saw the way they were presenting themselves, I didn't get it. It really left me cold. And I know I'm wrong now. I know all the ways in which I was wrong. But when I saw Kevin and Billy and Nick and Helen wearing these dark grey suits, and I remember Kevin wearing a sort of pale, chalky blue shirt, and to me, it looked as if they were going for a job interview to be, a bank employee. I didn't understand that there was any kind of style associated with it. It seemed to me to be conservative with a small C and a large C. It looked like a Tory look to me. And I just didn't get it. And their hair kind of neatly parted. And the thing that I didn't understand then, but I do understand now, was that it was provocative, and that the most provocative thing you could do in 1985 wasn't to have blue hair and put a spike through your nose. It was to go the opposite way. And the other thing with Kevin is he is and always has been a dresser. And he's always been about the detail and the minutiae of clothing. So for him, he would be able to tell the difference between an Ivy League Brooks Brothers suit and the suit that you wear because your mum has sent you to go for an interview to work in the bank. I didn't get that. In a way, it's like the mod thing. Mods fly under the radar. Mods recognise other mods because they know all about the exact number of buttons, pleats, the width of the lapel and all of that. But to mainstream society, it's just, oh, well, there's somebody wearing a smart suit. And the thing is, I understood the mod look because it was kind of retro and it was codified. But Kevin wasn't interested in being retro in that way. He was basically wearing what very wealthy, successful people in America would have been wearing at that time on Wall Street, as opposed to, people in Miami wearing espadrilles and what have you, and jackets pushed up to the elbow, which had crossed over into pop culture. But the look that he was imitating had not become part of pop culture, and I don't think it ever did. It was a calculated provocation, and he's always been brilliant at that. I love, by the way, listening to him talking about clothes in his book. It's so interesting the way that he starts off in the kind of skinhead movement, although he says they never called it that. And he traces the way it developed week by week according to what kind of size of turnips on your trousers were acceptable, and then 2 weeks later they weren't. He's so obsessive about that stuff, and it's brilliant. But as a 17-year-old, as I was when Don't Stand Me Down came out, I just thought, what have Dexys done? Why are they dressed like bank managers? So that really threw me, and I'm embarrassed now to admit that it probably meant that I approached the music in a negative way.
I think the problem is with being written off as what do you look like, accountants, double glazing salesmen. We were hit with all sorts of insults over the look, the preppy look, the Ivy League look. I think a part of the problem is people just saw that. They just briefly saw that look, and it wasn't explained. And I think if the same had happened with the 2IA era, and we'd just been seen in dungarees and that had failed, I think people would have said exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
Oh, look at the state of them in our tatty dungarees. No wonder they failed. And I think a large part of the problem with the look being misperceived is because we didn't get an opportunity to explain what it was and what it was about, and be seen more in the variations of the clothes, which you and Kevin looked great, and you loved them, didn't you? You wore that.
Absolutely.
Look all the time.
Yeah. Well, it felt so good after I've been living in sandals and grubby clothes for over a year. But I agree. I think that if something is successful, then the whole look and the image is right. That it's something it's sold, everybody loves it, and the dungarees are in the shops and all that sort of thing. But when something isn't explained or is not successful, then it's hammered. It's hammered because it's easy, isn't it? It's easy, and yet, when Kevin has explained that, when he tried to explain, has explained it since, you see, it wasn't that different, well, it was different, but it wasn't that crazy concept, when you think about where it came from. And Kevin was wearing those clothes, as he said, as a teenager.
Yeah, so for someone listening who might not know what the idea was behind the clothes and that image, I mean, what was the thinking there?
Well, it was sort of the preppy Brooke Brothers, the look that inspired the 60s mod thing, button-down collars and all the rest. You really need to speak to Kevin because he's the expert on the whole thing. I've got to be completely honest. I thought it was a great band look, and the band came first. But I absolutely did not wear any of those clothes around, when I was back home. I remember I always laugh about, I wasn't wandering around in plaid shorts and duck belts, myself. But I totally get it was a great band look. And the whole idea that it was based on this classic Ivy League look, which inspired the 60s mod thing. And people that knew about clothes knew what it was about. And I'll tell you, funnily enough, where it did go down quite badly. By that time, I'd made quite a few friends in New York because we would travel to America a few times. And whenever we were going to the States, if I could go out early, I'd go to New York and wait for everyone else to arrive, or stay there at the end of a tour or whatever. And I got a friend of mine to collect the clothes, and she just looked at me and she said, "Kevin, you do realise this is a really awful conservative look in the United States."
Yeah.
Because obviously the sort of people that were wearing these clothes were, government types, preppy types in America. It wasn't a look that young people aspired to, but it didn't mean that in the United Kingdom, and that's what Kevin's idea was. But to be so different in the UK, really.
The first time I heard any of the music, of course, famously, they didn't release a single from it, but eventually there was this kind of hacked up half-length extract from This Is What She's Like. And my dad worked for the local radio station, and he brought home a 12-inch promo of that. And, it had violins on it, and it sounded kind of like Touraye. And I thought, okay, they're still doing that. But because you're only hearing an extract, you're not getting the full effect of what that song is and what that song's trying to do. And it wasn't an album that was made for radio play in that way. And maybe I just didn't have the attention span. I think a lot of people didn't. Even journalists, even critics whose job is to sit down and pay attention to a record, didn't have the attention span to really take in that record. And now the consensus about that record tends to be that it's a masterpiece. And I hold that view as well. I do think it's a masterpiece, but it took me the best part of a decade to come to that view, I'm embarrassed to say. I went to see Kevin on his book tour recently, and somebody asked him a question about that. Don't Stand Me Down nowadays is seen as a masterpiece. And he just sort of laughed and said, yeah, I bloody well wish it was at the time, because it basically ended Dexys. I mean, they carried on and had a hit with Because of You and all of that. But, in some ways, it was the epitome of 1980s excess, the way that they started off in Montreux and ended in New York. And they went through this whole roll call of producers like Tom Dowd, who'd done all those great soul records, Al Green and all that. Jimmy Miller done the Rolling Stones. These guys came in, did a stint, were rejected. John Porter did a day, I think. Eventually, Alan Winstanley, who I think is a brilliant producer, does a brilliant job because he co-produced the first few Madness albums and Teardrop Explodes, and he understood how to take something from, the new wave, broadly speaking, that's a bit rough around the edges, and really make it sing, really make it pop-facing, and he'd done that with Touraye. Even though, Kevin eventually, or maybe always disliked Touraye and put out a remixed version. But for me, he did an amazing job on Don't Stand Me Down. But yeah, it's a view that I think a lot of people took a while to come round to. And I'm glad that Kevin lived long enough to see that album get the acclaim it deserved, but it must be frustrating for him.
So Tom Hibbett's singles review for This Is What She's Like. Tom says, Kevin Rowland's in this pub with this bloke called Bill who keeps saying, tell me what she's like, to him, right? I'm trying, Bill, I'm trying, Kevin replies. Trouble is, that's this half-baked Irish show band with a doddery old fiddle player blaring away in the corner, so Kevin can hardly hear himself think. And anyway, he's getting quite drunk and so keeps losing himself in the middle of sentences and howling along with the show band, but not getting the words quite right, or the tune for that matter. Bill never does find out what she's like, whoever she might be, and Kevin wakes up next morning with a massive hangover and the awful dawning realisation that last night he made this simply ludicrous pop disc... ... So, Chris, the big question is, knowing Tom as you did you think he liked that single? It's hard to tell whether it's approving or not. I feel like it kind of is.
I think he probably... I mean, I think... I'm slightly on the side of thinking he probably didn't like it.
Okay.
Though certainly, because I've seen the word ludicrous quoted as like saying, oh, so obviously he didn't like it. That's not a clue at all. That he could easily call something ludicrous as the highest praise. I think Tom, there's a weird... thing that I don't know whether it played any part in it, but Tom, the fourth person on the cover, Nick Hatfield, who then became a music executive at EMI, Tom knew him. I think I don't know the history. I think they must have been in bands. There'd always be quite a lot of people who Tom had once been in bands with. And I might be being unfair, but I always felt maybe that would make Tom less likely to like it.
Well, Listen to This should have been the lead single.
Oh,
That's
God,
just the most obvious pop song, isn't it? That's a real kind of, almost like a Northern Soul dancer, but also this really pure love song. There's not really any other agenda to it. There's no twist to it. It's a straightforward love song, heart on sleeve, really.
Yeah. And it's the bridge between To Rye and Don't Stand Me Down.
Yeah.
It would have been absolutely perfect as a single.
But then it wouldn't have been the sort of statement that, was made by This Is What She's Like being ostensibly the lead track. It is absolutely electrifying and remarkable. I listened to it just now before talking to you guys again. And the way it moves through sort of three different movements, really, it's just... The genius of it is he never tells us what she's like, but he does. He spends most of the record kind of saying what she's not like. He's listing all these things that she would never say and she would never do. Some of which really offended me at the time, by the way. The stuff about CND. I was CND to the core. And I thought, oh my God, what? Kevin's anti-CND? What's going on here? But I now understand what was symbolised by CND. It was the type of people that he's describing with their home bars and their high fives, these newly wealthy peasants, people who iron a crease in their old Levi's, people who use phrases like tongue-in-cheek, all that stuff. He's building up a picture of a certain kind of middle-class person. And it's class war. That's what this record is, apart from anything else. It's a class war record. So a lot of that stuff, it was almost, as much as the clothes they were wearing, lyrics like that were almost calculated to alienate people like me. I thought, oh my God, I'm a Dexys fan and he hates me. But I get it, and I certainly get it in the context of the rest of the album, where he's on about people's political priorities. On the song One of Those Things, where he, the one that's ripped off from Werewolves of London, and it mentions this DJ called Sid Jenkins, who it took me forever to realise is Kid Jensen, is what is meant to be. But he's on about all these sort of groups with their synthesizers and soulful guises, as he puts it, and we can all fill in who might be meant by that, whether it's, I don't know, Heaven 17, Style Council, Eurythmics, Paul Young, all these bands. And he goes on about so-called socialists, and none of them want to know about Ireland. They all talk about Sandinista, so I guess he's having a bit of a go at Joe Strummer there, and all these other political causes that they're willing to align themselves with. But Belfast is just over the sea, and they don't want to know. And that was a really powerful point. And he had a point. There were so few songs I can think of in that post-punk era about the Troubles. There was Oliver's Army by Elvis Costello. There was The More I See, The Less I Believe by Funboy 3, which was basically banned from radio and didn't even make the top 40. And then there were various songs by Dexys, right from Dance Dance in the beginning, which is all about the anti-Irish racism of people who think that they're thick paddies and all that kind of stuff. Through to this album, and in that context, I understand it. I understand why he was having a go at people who made a big deal of being CND. But his point was, she was not like that at all. And one of the funniest bits is when Billy Adams is saying, "Tell me what she's like," and he just stops and he says, "Bill, I'm trying." And he is trying, but he does tell us, but he tells us in the la la las and the ooh oohs and all that stuff. That's when he tells us what she's like. That he says, can I express myself? Can I express myself? And that bit, it's like James Brown, isn't it? Can I take it to the bridge? Can I take it to the bridge? He's asking permission for what he's about to do. And oh God, yeah, it's a work of staggering genius, that song. It really is.
Yeah, just as you were saying that, I thought, oh, this is like it's James Brown and Bobby Bird. That's
yeah,
kind of what it is. It's the West Midlands version of it. Yeah. And then you said James Brown, like, yes, it's
people go on about Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. You know, that's the usual comparison that's made. But yeah, I guess it's James Brown and Bobby Bird. Yeah,
Brilliant.
The single should come first, shouldn't it? Really, I suppose.
Yeah.
Did it make the top 40? I don't remember it being in the top 40. Do you remember?
I don't think so.
It didn't chart high, did it at all? And there were lots of versions of it. There was a 10-inch, there was a double pack 7-inch, the 7-inch with the radio edit and all sorts of versions of it.
Yeah.
And it still didn't do great, but it was probably too late after the fact as well. And it was kind of a compromise, to go from saying we're not going to have a single and then, it looks like we're going to have a single.
Yeah.
And we were still putting the band together, weren't we, to go out and play live ourselves. But we both went to Nashville, didn't we?
We did.
And auditioned musicians from Memphis and all over.
That's right.
And we got that band together and they were put in hotels and we rehearsed the live band.
Yeah.
And the band was being put together to go out and perform on the back of a successful album. And it was to a very different audience than the one that we'd hoped for, really.
Yes.
But I remember looking back at it and like looking in my diaries a little bit and thinking, hold on, I don't think we even played 10 shows with that band. When you think how much work it was to put the band together, living and working with that band and rehearsing and getting ready, putting that show together, it wasn't seen by as many people as it should have been, was it?
I went to the tour, which nobody ever talks about this tour, and I think it was a big flop. And I remember taking the bus in. I lived in Ealing, and so I went on my own to the Dominion Theatre. So no one must have wanted to come, and it was the weirdest show. And the thing that everyone. Again, it just unticking all the boxes was the live band had a member of Atomic Rooster in it. None of us really knew what that meant, except that you shouldn't have a band with a member of Atomic Rooster. And he looked like he was a member of Atomic Rooster, whatever that was. I think he's got Vincent Crane comes to mind. But this show was fantastically mad. And I think I'm right in saying it opens, and Billy's sitting on a bench with a guitar on his own, and Kevin wanders out, and there's just the two of them, and they sing Can't Help Falling in Love, the Elvis Presley song. Now, again, now that sounds like that's a cool kind of thing to do. That's not a 1985 thing to do. That's, and it just went from there, and it was and it didn't have, and it was all of these different tropes and stuff, but it was, it wasn't as transcendent as that tape from Germany that I was talking about. But it was just, you just knew you were in a place of total weirdness.
Oh, I wish I'd seen one of those shows, because that might have put it all in context for me. Because Dexys were the first band I went to see on my own.
Yeah.
On the Bridge tour, the 2IA tour in Cardiff in '82. Which was just mind-blowing. But if I'd seen the Don't Stand Me Down tour, that might have just made it all for me.
Obviously, at the time when it didn't do so well, I guess there's a bit of a feeling of sort of deflation, and, you had plans for the tour, which didn't really kind of go as you'd imagined. Do you remember how long it was, both of you, to get a sense of, well, actually, this album is kind of important and does mean something to people, and it's not being completely forgotten?
For myself, I couldn't listen to it for a long time. It was kind of hard making it. I mean, I've said this before, and it was a difficult album to make. It took an awful lot of our energy, and as Helen said, the whole process was tiring, and putting the live band together, and the lack of success was deflating. And at the end, when the band split up, and it's sometime around the spring of 1986 for me, I remember I used to, you and Kevin worked together in London, didn't you, Helen? And I used to have a ride down on a Wednesday, I think it was like once a week, if it was once a week or once a fortnight, and I used to pop down and have a listen and see how it was going. I didn't have very much input anymore. And that's when Kevin said, I think I want the next album to be my own solo album. And that just made so much sense. And it was such a weight off my shoulders personally, because I didn't have the same enthusiasm for the whole thing. And I think a lot of that was the work that we'd put into Don't Stand Me Down. And it felt like the project as a whole had failed, really. The album had failed commercially, got a few decent critical reviews, and, some of the old fans liked it, which was great. But it all felt like it sort of fizzled out a bit for me. But, everything gets reviewed further down the line, doesn't it? And revised. And it was what brought it home to me was those Twitter listening parties we did in around 2021, I think, with Don't Stand Me Down, with Tim and, the crew. And just seeing the love for the album then just felt so good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think for me, it seemed like a natural end for us all, really, and that there wasn't any falling out with each other. And I remember Bernie Rhodes being quite involved with Kevin and chatting. I remember feeling that he wanted Kevin to do a solo project, or maybe Kevin had decided that. But I remember talking to Kevin Rowland a few years ago, and he said he remembered me saying I wanted to leave. And I think I just thought, well, I'm going to get out before I'm told to get out, or just, you know what I mean? I just sort of thought, actually, this is an opportunity now, fresh slate. And we've done Because of You, which has been a great little side project. It was a beautiful song. There was a time limit on it, and it was a nice ending. I thought it was a nice sort of positive ending after with the hugeness of Don't Stand Me Down. And it was, I think, it wasn't until I did an interview with Pete Bafides, actually, for the Radio 4 follow-up albums, and that was on Don't Stand Me Down. And I had to really think about it again. I didn't really want to do the interview initially. And then I thought, no, maybe I should. And so I had to think about the album again, and it made me realise what, after that long gap, it was still great as far as I was concerned. But like you say, Kev, those listening were just so great for Dexys, for all the albums, really. And the comments and feedback during Don't Stand Me Down listening party were incredible. And they certainly turned... They were very influential on Kevin remixing to IA as well. He was hearing the albums in a different way. So Tim Burgess did a good job, really good job. Bless him.
For me, the journalist who really nailed its place in history was Chris Roberts at Melody Maker. Chris Roberts was one of the few, when he was at Sounds, who gave it a gushing, glowing review at the time. But 10 years later, when Chris was at Melody Maker, we put out a free book called Unknown Pleasures, where we all had to choose a great lost album. And Chris wrote about Don't Stand Me Down and really nailed what was so good about it. And I think that was really important. But yeah, I mean, for a long time, post Don't Stand Me Down, through to the mid-90s, even admitting being a Dexys fan was such a rare thing that if you found a Dexys fan in the wild, if you were at a house party and you met somebody and Dexys come up and it turns out they're a fan, you're stood in the corner with that person all night. You've got a friend for life because it was so important. It was so rare. I guess it's not so rare anymore. But Don't Stand Me Down might be the ultimate slow burner in terms of an album and its reputation.
Yeah. Do you think that that piece by Chris in the Unknown Pleasures book, do you think that was really the start of the kind of movement of culture, of like critical reappraisal of the album?
I really do. Yeah, I think that book, Unknown Pleasures, was very, very influential. And Chris has been a staunch fan all the way through. I suppose I can't really claim to have been because I drifted away and then came back to the fold. But the early records have always had a place in my heart. But Don't Stand Me Down, I suppose, baffled me when it came out. And maybe I wasn't mature enough, but I fully understand that album now. It's an album which manages to be at the same time quite trivial there's all this sort of knockabout humor, there's all the comedy on there, but incredibly profound as well. It's just a phenomenal achievement, and only 7 songs, although 45 minutes. Those songs each have plenty of time to state their case. In a way, an album like Don't Stand Me Down had been in the post for a while, in that it is so uncompromising, because on the opening song of the original release, Occasional Flicker, there is the line, "Compromise is the devil talking, and he spoke to me." And by the way, in his book, we learn ways in which he did feel that early Dexys had compromised themselves. For example, that kind of New York Italian docker look that they went for was itself a compromise, because prior to that, they dressed in quite a kind of flamboyant, mismatched post-Roxy music sort of way, which if Kevin had been allowed to carry on with that, he believes would have put them at the forefront of the new romantic movement. But instead, and this is to do with the advice of Bernie Rhodes, who had basically twisted their arm into going on the Two-Tone tour, that they had to go for a look that the skinheads would understand. And that look was it. And so he felt that was a compromise. So, I guess the whole point of the way they look on this album, the way they sound on this album, the things he's saying, is him finally tearing that all up, setting fire, burning it, and saying no more compromise.
If you were recommending this album to someone who'd never heard it before, so which happened to me 10 years ago, my mate Steve said, "You've got to hear this." He's like, "This is my favourite album. I've got a spare copy. Here you go. Take it home and listen to it." And I was like your first reaction back in 1985. That was my reaction. 2015. It's like, I don't understand this, and it's taken 10 years for it to kind of. Yeah, a slow burn. It's like it's on the back burner, but it's one that you do keep coming back to. So somebody who's never heard it before, you're recommending it to them. How do you do that?
I wouldn't.
How do you do? You wouldn't.
If they're not familiar with Dexys beyond the hits,
yeah,
I would say, look, dip your toe in the water. Start off with Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, Tour IA. Take a deep breath. Sit down in a darkened room. Switch your phone off. Put the needle on This Is What She's Like and listen to it, and then do it again, and then listen to the rest of the album, and then maybe read the Chris Roberts piece in Unknown Pleasures, because I don't think it's an album for the faint-hearted.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this deep dive, as they call it these days, into Dexys Don't Stand Me Down. And maybe it'll send you back to the album. You'll find it on streaming services, or maybe you've already got a copy. Who knows? But go and have a listen to it again now that you've had a listen to this. And you'll also find in the show notes for this episode links to a YouTube playlist that includes many of the performances and songs that have been mentioned throughout the discussion of the album. We've also put in there the link to Tim's Twitter listening party for Don't Stand Me Down from 10th of July 2020. So you'll see the tweets that went out at the time. That was in the days when we called it Twitter. The tweets that went out at the time with the replay of the album, and also the link to the follow-up albums Radio 4 documentary that Helen mentioned that was done with Pete Perfides looking at Don't Stand Me Down. So you'll find all those things there so you can explore the album a little further if you want to.
And so a massive thank you to Chris, Pricey, and of course Helen and Kevin for talking to us about such a special album.
Indeed, and thanks to you for listening. Don't forget you can find us on the socials. Come and say hello, don't be a stranger, at Giddy Pop Pod on Blue Sky, Instagram and Facebook. You can support us by buying us a coffee if you so desire, ko-fi.com/giddypoppod, or by simply leaving us a review on your podcast app of choice.
And we promise we won't leave it too long before we're back again with a new episode. I think we're back tomorrow, aren't we, Si? Is it tomorrow? Is it a little bit longer
It might be the day after, I don't know.
All right, maybe the day after tomorrow. But we will be back again before too long, we promise.
Yeah, it's true. So until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again for another ride on the Giddy Carousel of Pop. Bye! Bye! Maybe next year.
I've got one more word for you. Fulmine. Fulmine. Do you know what that is?
Thunderbolt in Italian.
Yes!
Yeah. Nice reference. Well done.